Hong Kong does seem a strange place to meet up with one of America's top foreign policy advisors, Dr. Henery Kissinger. But considering that Dr. Kissinger was in China as a forerunner to President Bill Clinton's visit, Hong Kong was perhaps the ideal stopover. Dr. Kissinger has had a long-standing relationship with China. He promoted the American policy of détente with China and even accompanied Nixon on his historic China visit in 1972. All this makes Henery Kissinger uniquely qualified to comment on how India's nuclear status could affect its relations with the People's Republic.
Dr. Kissinger, with regard to India and China, you have said in a recent interview that the conventional wisdom is that between countries of that size, deterrence works. Now, can you elaborate on this? Because this is very much the view in India as well.
Deterrence has worked between countries like the Soviet Union and the United States. There's no reason why it shouldn't work between India and China. And for that matter, why it shouldn't work between India and Pakistan, except that between India and Pakistan there are emotional considerations that make rational calculation more difficult. But there's nothing inherent in these equations that should make nuclear war more likely. In fact, I think it would make nuclear war less likely.
Are the Chinese as understanding of this view?
I didn't go to China to discuss the Indian nuclear program. I think the Chinese have their own disagreements with India, and they didn't appreciate that India singled them out as the reason for the tests. But on the other hand, I didn't think they were particularly panicked.
Now, India's view is clearly that CTBT, as it stands today, is an unfair treaty. How would you comment on this?
On the complete test ban, I would hope that India will join it in time. But I think the major issue that I see is a regime by which nuclear technology will not be proliferated from nuclear weapons countries to non-nuclear weapons countries.
How do you think US policy towards India at the moment is shaping? How do you think President Clinton ought to deal with India now in this new context of a nuclear South Asia?
I believe we ought to state some criteria by which we express our proliferation concerns. And I hope that we will get into a dialogue with India on that subject. And I expect it to be reasonably resolved. I don't look at India as an enemy of the United States, quite the contrary.
So how serious do you think the entire issue of sanctions is? Or how long-term do you think the issue of sanctions is?
I have just written an article in which I point out that sanctions almost never work. That the second problem with sanctions is that you don't know how to end them. The third problem is that there are no criteria by which you can end them. And so in principle, leaving aside this particular issue, I am not in favor of sanctions. The United States is now sanctioning 73 nations in one way or another, and that's not a reasonable position for the United States to take.
So what is your assessment of what has worldwide been seen as a colossal CIA failure?
They really didn't think India would test. And here you have President Clinton saying, here's this wonderful country, and it goes about testing. If you're that innocent, you're likely to be surprised. But supposing we had known, what would we have done?
Dr. Kissinger, moving on to Kashmir, the world, including America, doesn't seem to realize that there are more Muslims in India than there are in all of Pakistan. I mean, Indian secularism protects the world's second largest Muslim population. Now, if this fact were actually absorbed by the foreign policy establishment in your country, do you not think that the Kashmir issue would be handled differently?
Now, the first thing you have to understand, insulting as this may be to both India and Pakistan, that 98% conservatively of the American public have never heard of Kashmir. So they don't have an opinion of whether it is Muslim, Buddhist, or whatever it may be. They just have never heard of it. So there is no public opinion on Kashmir in the United States. There is some elite opinion in the United States.
So what are your views on the consistent efforts to internationalize Kashmir?
If you're not in possession, And if you don't want to go to war, that's almost the only thing you can do. I understand the Pakistani position. My basic view of American foreign policy is that we have to learn to concentrate on those issues that vitally affect the direct American interest. If there were a danger of war between India and Pakistan, then I would favor a very active policy when it happens. But to solve the Kashmir problem, unless somebody tells me what the solution should look like, I think it's beyond our capacity.
Dr. Kissinger, thank you very, very much.